Is it correct to assume that the strength of an empire that managed to stand for 6 centuries came solely from its army? Or is that a deeply incomplete perspective? As the territories covered on maps expanded, campaigns followed one another, and borders crossed continents, the real question was this: what kind of financial moves made it possible for this system to continue? The answer to this question was hidden not in the sword, but in accounting ledgers. Unlike many states that expanded through conquest and rapidly consumed what they gained, the Ottoman Empire developed a financial mindset that did not merely spend its wealth, but organized it, recorded it, and made it sustainable. This mindset recognized early on that plunder was temporary, while order was permanent. At the center of the empire was not money itself, but where, when, and by whom money would be used. Thanks to this approach, the Ottomans did not fall apart as they expanded, nor did they lose control as they grew. Our story begins precisely at this point. If you enjoy deep historical financial narratives like this, I recommend subscribing to the channel so you don't miss what comes next, because this series will reveal the unseen power of empires step by step. The Ottoman financial order was not built on random taxes or arbitrary spending. The income-generating capacity of land was measured. Population balance was taken into account, and the pace of state spending was adjusted accordingly. Rules were established not to accelerate the circulation of money, but to prevent disorder. For this reason, Ottoman finance aimed not for sudden enrichment, but for stability. The strength of the treasury did not come from abundance in a single year, but from predictability sustained over decades. The state learned not only how to increase revenue, but also how to protect it. This perspective allowed the empire to remain standing not only in times of war, but also during periods of peace. Yet this system was not merely an abstract principle. It was supported by concrete practices. So what were these practices, and how did the Ottomans increase their power by controlling money? The first major move behind the growth of the Ottoman Empire's financial power was the ideal of tying income to land. As the empire expanded, money was not meant to flow into the palace and dissolve as mere plunder. It had to transform into a continuously productive system. For this reason, the state retained ownership of land and governed its income through rules. Although the timar system may appear from the outside as a distribution of land, it was in fact a financial design that disciplined cash flow. Land revenues were allocated to sipahis in return for service, and the sipahi was obliged to maintain a specific number of cavalry soldiers and remain ready for campaign using that income. These allocations were not uniform, depending on the size of the revenue. Categories such as timar, zimit, and has were formed, thereby scaling both provincial administration hierarchy and military obligations. The most critical point in this system was this: these lands could not be converted into private property. The state could replace officials at will and redistribute income accordingly. In this way, the emergence of a hereditary feudal class similar to that in Europe was prevented, and the tax base did not fall under the monopoly of certain families. Moreover, the central authority used income distribution as a tool of political balance. Loyalty was rewarded, officials who abused their position were removed, and when collection became too harsh in certain regions, distribution and authority were reorganized. Land surveys were conducted. Population, production, fields, vineyards, mills, and similar items were recorded village by village, and through tapu tahrir, registers, the income potential of each region was calculated systematically. This record-keeping order resembled an early form of modern budgeting. The state became able to predict its revenue and plan expenditures, and military campaigns accordingly. Oversight was just as critical. Judges and local administrators monitored whether collections complied with the rules, and excessive exploitation of revenues was punished. as it would both reduce production and increase the risk of rebellion. Thus, the Ottomans attempted to manage tax revenue not with a collect today, think tomorrow mentality, but with a sustainability logic that preserved a productive cycle. Of course, the system was not flawless. Over time, as population, war costs, and the need for cash increased, more cash-oriented methods, especially tax, farming, iltizam, gained strength alongside the timar system. Yet during the period of expansion, what timar provided was this. The state was able to finance security while simultaneously maintaining economic order in the provinces without losing central control. The clues of this transition will become clearer in the next step. So when the cashless financing power of the timar system was no longer sufficient to grow the treasury, how did the Ottomans shift to cash? And how did they establish this new system that converted taxes into upfront money? The growing need for cash in Ottoman finance led the state toward a flexible but equally risky instrument. The name of this system was tax farming, known as iltizam. This system meant the advance sale of tax revenues in return for a fixed payment, and its main objective was to quickly close the treasury's short-term cash gap. The state would auction the right to collect annual taxes from a region and transfer that right to the highest bidder, the tax farmer. In return, the treasury immediately received cash, and the financing of wars, salaries, and urgent expenditures was secured. Although iltizam appears on the surface to be a simple form of tax leasing, there was a careful balance behind it. The center did not leave the tax farmer completely free. Through judges and local oversight mechanisms, it attempted to limit excessive collection because the state knew that crushing the productive peasantry for the sake of high short-term revenue would collapse the tax base in the long run. For this reason, iltizam played a complementary role alongside the timar system rather than fully replacing it. It was used more intensively, especially in periods when cash was most needed, namely during long war years. The financial intelligence here lay in not completely losing control while mortgaging future income. The treasury received cash in advance and transferred part of the risk to the tax farmer. But not all risk was transferred. Contracts were time-limited and could be renewed or cancelled. In this way, the Ottomans applied a logic similar to modern state borrowing instruments within their own conditions. Instead of borrowing with interest, the state pulled future tax revenue into the present, while transferring not ownership, but only the right of collection. This approach increased the treasury's flexibility but also created new problems. Over time, powerful tax farmers emerged. Local power centers formed in some regions, and the center had to balance this power. Still, iltizam played a critical role in Ottoman financial resilience. The system was imperfect but highly functional. Thanks to it, the empire was able to overcome sudden cash shocks. But after the treasury collected this cash, how was it stored, managed, and stabilized? Another question as important as revenue remained. How did the Ottomans preserve the value of money and maintain balance in its circulation? Another critical area that ensured the continuity of Ottoman financial power was the management of money itself, because preserving the value of collected revenue was just as central to state reasoning as collecting it. In the Ottoman system, money was not merely a medium of exchange. It was a concrete symbol of trust and authority. For this reason, strict barriers and rules were placed on coin minting. Mints were kept under direct central supervision. The state recognized early on that arbitrarily increasing the money supply to create temporary relief would produce inflation and distrust in the long run. Therefore, coin standards, meaning the gold and silver ratios, were carefully preserved. Adjustments made from time to time were not hidden, but controlled. The goal was not to deceive the system, but to keep it standing. The Ottomans also closely monitored the speed of money circulation. In regions where trade was intense, sufficient cash availability was ensured, while in rural areas sudden, monetary withdrawals that could freeze production were prevented. This balance required constant coordination between the central treasury and local markets. In addition, conversion ratios between different coins used in various regions were determined to facilitate the flow of trade. Thus, despite its vast geography, the empire was able to create the sense of a unified monetary order. Monetary stability directly affected tax collection as well. A currency that rapidly lost value reduced the real power of collected revenue. For this reason, Ottoman finance focused not only on suppressing inflation, but also on preserving trust. However, as foreign trade expanded and global silver flows changed, maintaining this balance became more difficult. The influx of silver from Europe pushed prices upward in domestic markets and forced the center to take new measures. Still, the core principle did not change. Money represented the reputation of the state. And when that reputation was damaged, military and administrative power would also weaken. The Ottomans' real success was not eliminating monetary problems entirely, but keeping them within manageable limits. So how did all this revenue, taxation, and monetary order create discipline in state spending? Where did the Ottomans invest their earnings, and how did they allocate expenditures? We will discuss this in the next chapter. Contrary to appearances, the true strength of the Ottoman financial system came not only from its ability to collect revenue and manage money, but from its understanding of keeping expenditures under discipline. For the state, the main issue was not how much it earned, but how predictably and how balanced it spent what it earned. For this reason, a budget-like mindset was formed early on. There were invisible but strict boundaries between palace expenses, military costs, foundations, and public services. Spending categories were not arbitrarily inflated and extraordinary. Expenses were matched with extraordinary revenues whenever possible. Although costs rose rapidly, especially during wartime, a tightening reflex came into effect during years of peace, and burdens that strained the treasury were reduced. The foundation system was one of the key components of this discipline. Areas such as education, health, construction, and social aid were financed not directly from the treasury but from foundation revenues. In this way, the state shared social burdens and did not force the treasury into constant spending. This approach created an important distinction between the Ottomans and states that appeared financially strong but collapsed under social burdens. The central administration also closely monitored provincial expenditures. Governors and district administrators operated within defined budget limits, and excessive spending became a subject of investigation. Thus, waste was seen not only as a moral problem but as a financial threat, because uncontrolled spending increases tax pressure, which in turn damages production and loyalty. The Ottomans recognized this cycle early. Spending discipline became one of the quiet reasons behind the empire's long lifespan. Of course, this system was strained over time. Advancing war technologies, the growth of a salaried army, and global competition increased expenses. However, the core reflex did not change. If spending was rising, either a new revenue source had to be found or the system had to be rebalanced. At this point, Ottoman finance entered a crossroads. When traditional methods began to fall short, the state was forced to turn toward new instruments. So at what point did this transformation begin? And under what pressures did the classical financial order start to unravel? The financial strength of the Ottoman Empire, which managed to remain standing for 6 centuries, was not based on a single magical formula, but on a consistent whole of complementary practices. The timar system that tied land to revenue, the iltizam system that flexibly met cash needs, Strict mint and coin policies focused on preserving the value of money, and spending discipline supported by foundations. None of these was flawless on its own, yet when they worked together, they produced an economic balance that made a vast geography governable. The Ottoman financial mindset invested in long-term stability rather than short-term enrichment. For this reason, even in its strongest periods, the empire did not concentrate all its resources in a single area. It diversified revenues, distributed risks, and did not allow hereditary financial power centers that would weaken central authority to emerge. However, times changed. Global trade networks expanded, the cost of wars increased, the cash economy accelerated, and the pressure on traditional systems grew and strained them. The Ottomans did not remain completely indifferent to these pressures. They made adjustments and tried new methods. Nevertheless, the emergence of modern financial instruments and the intensification of global competition made the limits of the classical financial order visible. The lesson to be drawn from this is not why the Ottomans collapsed, but why they were able to endure for so long. Because what determines the lifespan of empires is not only the wars they win, but how they manage money. The Ottoman example shows us that financial power is achieved not only by increasing revenue, but by disciplining revenue, limiting spending, and preserving trust. This principle, which still remains valid today, stands not only as a historical success story, but also as a quiet warning for modern economies.